My kids sold my only dream for $1,000 while I was in the hospital. When a cab pulled up to my house that afternoon, the air smelled like fresh-cut grass and my own peace of mind. Two things occupied my brain right then: the dull ache in my newly operated knee and this warm, stupid pride swelling in my chest. My kids had finally grown up. That's what I kept telling myself, replaying Mark's phone call from earlier that week. The taxi driver helped me with my hospital bag, and I tipped him probably too much because I was feeling generous with the universe. Life was good. My knee would heal. My kids cared about me. Simple math, right? I fumbled with the garage door opener on my keychain. The door groaned and rolled up, revealing the concrete floor. Empty concrete floor. Where my 1967 Shelby GT500 should have been sitting, there was just a dark oil stain. Like a wound. That moment hung there. You know how sometimes your brain refuses to process what your eyes are seeing? That was me, standing there with my mouth probably hanging open like some cartoon character. The space where 40 years of my life had been parked was just nothing. An oil stain that looked like it was mocking me. At that second, I thought I'd been robbed. Just a simple theft. I didn't know yet that the real crime was worse. The people I loved most had done this, and they'd done it while telling me they loved me. But let me back up. You need to understand what that car meant. Not was meant, because even when it wasn't there, it still meant everything. Spring of 1967. Maria and I had been married exactly 3 months. We were walking past this used car lot in Detroit. Not even a nice one, the kind with more weeds and cars, when she grabbed my arm. There it sat, looking like it had been through a war and lost. Rust had eaten through the quarter panels. The hood was primer gray. One headlight was missing entirely. But Maria saw something I didn't. She said we should buy it. I laughed, actually laughed at her. We had maybe $400 to our name, and my draft notice was sitting on our kitchen table like a ticking bomb. Vietnam was calling, and here she wanted to buy a rust bucket. But Maria had this way of looking at things. She saw that car not as it was, but as it could be. She said we'd fix it up together when I got back. Said it would give us something to dream about while we were apart. How do you say no to that? We bought it for $350, cash. The seller probably thought he'd won the lottery, unloading that heap. The thing is, that Shelby became more than just our project. It was my connection to something deeper. See, my old man ran a shop called Franklin & Son Auto Repair. And before you ask, yeah, I was a son. Or supposed to be. Growing up, that shop was my whole world. The smell of motor oil was my mother's perfume. She died when I was 5, and Dad raised me between oil changes and brake jobs. I'd hand him tools before he even asked for them. By 12, I could diagnose engine problems just by listening. Dad used to tell customers I had the gift. He had this saying that he'd repeat like gospel. People will let you down, George, but good iron never will. At the time, I thought he was just bitter about Mom dying. Now I wonder if he knew something about human nature that I was too young to understand. The plan was simple. I'd go to Vietnam, do my time, come back, and we'd build a business together. Franklin & Son would mean something. We'd maybe expand, open a second location. American dream stuff. But plans have this funny way of falling apart. I came back from Vietnam in one piece. More or less. Had some nights where I'd wake up swinging at shadows. But Maria would hold me until the shaking stopped. We had Mark in 1970, Jenny in 1972. Suddenly, that auto shop dream looked different when you had 2 kids needing food, clothes, doctor visits. State Farm was hiring insurance agents. Steady salary, health benefits, pension plan. Everything a responsible father should want. The day I told Dad I was taking the job, he was under a Chevy, only his legs sticking out. He rolled out slow, stood up slower, and started wiping his hands on a rag. Kept wiping them long after they were clean. Finally, he just nodded, didn't say a word. But in that silence, there was more disappointment than any lecture could have carried. Franklin & Son became just Franklin. The sign stayed the same for another year, like he was hoping I'd come to my senses. Then one day, It just said Franklin Auto Repair. I told myself the Shelby would be my way back. Once the kids were grown, once we had enough saved, I'd restore it properly and maybe, just maybe, find my way back to what I was supposed to be. Maria understood. She'd spend evenings with me in the garage, holding the flashlight while I worked on whatever small fix I could afford that month. We'd talk about the future. When Mark graduated, when Jenny got married, when we could finally take that road trip to California we'd been promising ourselves since our honeymoon. The Shelby would be cherry by then, purring like a kitten, turning heads at every stoplight. Maria died in 2018. Pancreatic cancer. 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. Near the end, when the morphine had her floating between this world and whatever comes next, she made me promise to finish the car. Said she wanted me to drive it to California and scatter some of her ashes at the Pacific. Funny thing about promises to the dying, they become sacred. That car went from being our project to being my church. Every turn of a wrench was a prayer. Every part one restored was a conversation with her ghost. Fast forward to last week. My knee had been getting worse for years. Too many hours standing on concrete at State Farm offices. Probably. Doctors said I needed replacement surgery unless I wanted to end up in a wheelchair. Medicare would cover the basics, but nothing fancy. I was lying in that hospital bed, breathing in that smell of antiseptic and floor cleaner that erases all personality, feeling sorry for myself, when Mark called. His voice had that careful tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. My stomach dropped. He started talking about insurance complications. Said the new physical therapy protocol was experimental, not fully covered. The hospital needed $1,500 up front, or they'd discharge me with just a basic recovery plan. Might not walk right again without proper rehab. I'm not ashamed to admit I panicked. Social Security doesn't exactly make you rich. I had maybe $2,000 in savings, and that was for emergencies. Well, bigger emergencies than this one. Then Mark said something that changed everything. Or at least, I thought it did. He told me not to worry. Said he and Jenny had already figured it out. They'd pooled their money, handled everything. For a split second, a tiny, cynical voice in the back of my head whispered that it couldn't be that easy. But I crushed it instantly. Why wouldn't it be? These are my kids. All I needed to do was focus on getting better. You spend your whole life taking care of your kids, watching them grow, hoping you're doing right by them. Then suddenly they're taking care of you, and you realize maybe you did okay after all. I hung up that phone feeling like I'd won the lottery. Not the money lottery, something better. The nurse came in to check my vitals, and I couldn't shut up about my kids. Told her how Mark had just made junior partner at his firm, how Jenny was teaching special education, even though she could make twice as much doing something else, how they'd stepped up when I needed them most. The nurse smiled that patient smile they perfect in nursing school, but I didn't care. I was floating on this cloud of pure pride. I kept thinking about my dad in those hospital days, how he'd built his business from nothing, hoping to pass it on. How disappointed he'd been when I chose a safe path instead. But here I was, lying in that bed, thinking maybe I'd built something better than a business. I'd built good people, caring people, the kind who'd sacrifice for family. My therapist came in the next morning, this young kid who couldn't have been more than 25. He was showing me exercises for the knee when he asked about my motivation for recovery, what was waiting for me at home. I told him about the Shelby. How I was going to finish the restoration, how my kids had made sure I could afford the best therapy, so I could get back to working on it. The kid's eyes lit up. Turned out his grandfather had a '69 Mustang. We spent the whole session talking about classic cars while he bent my knee in ways that made me want to scream. But I didn't scream. I had something to get back to, a promise to keep, a car to finish. The next 3 days passed in a blur of exercises, bad hospital food, and this warm feeling that wouldn't go away. My kids called every day. Jenny sent flowers. Mark said he'd cleaned out the garage, so I'd have more room to work when I got home. Looking back, that should have been my first clue. Mark had never cleaned anything in his life without being threatened. On my last night in the hospital, I lay there planning out the rest of the restoration. The engine needed a complete rebuild. I'd been putting it off because it was the biggest job. But with my new knee, with my kids supporting me, maybe it was time. I'd order the parts online, take my time, do it right. Maria would have loved seeing it finished. Hell, she probably would have insisted on helping, bad hands and all. I could picture her so clearly, sitting on that little stool we kept in the garage, reading me torque specs in the manual while I worked. The doctor came by for final discharge instructions, said the therapy was all set up, fully covered. I almost corrected him. Wanted to tell him my kids had paid for the upgraded program. But then I thought maybe they'd work something out directly with the billing department. They were smart kids. Mark especially knew his way around bureaucracy. I signed the papers, collected my prescriptions, and waited for my taxi. The same driver who'd brought me in happened to be the one picking me up. He recognized me, asked how the surgery went. I told him it went perfect. Told him everything was perfect. God, I was such an idiot. But sitting in that hospital lobby, waiting for the cab, I felt like the richest man in Detroit. Not money rich, purpose rich, love rich. My kids had shown me what really mattered. They'd grown up to be exactly the people I'd hoped they'd become. Caring, generous, family first. The Shelby would get finished now. I was sure of it. And when I drove it, when I finally took that trip to California, it would mean even more because my kids had made it possible. They'd given me the gift of time, of proper healing, of being able to finish what Maria and I had started all those years ago. I actually thought about calling my dad's old number, even though he'd been dead for 15 years. Wanted to tell him that maybe I hadn't carried on the family business, but I'd carried on something better. I'd raised kids who understood what family meant. The taxi pulled away from the hospital, and I watched the building shrink in the rear window. Chapter closed. New chapter beginning. My knee would heal, the car would get finished, and my kids, my wonderful, generous kids, had made it all possible. If only I'd known what was waiting for me at home. If only I'd asked more questions. If only I'd been less trusting. But that's the thing about betrayal from the people you love most. You never see it coming. Because seeing it coming would mean admitting that the foundation of your whole life, everything you believe about family and love and sacrifice, might be built on sand. And who wants to admit that while they're lying in a hospital bed, high on painkillers and even higher on false pride, the cab ride home from the hospital felt like victory lap. Every bump in the road sent a spike through my knee. But I didn't care. I was going home. My kids had taken care of everything. Life was good. I tipped the driver again. Another 20, because why not celebrate? And limped up my driveway. The house smelled exactly how I'd left it. That mixture of old coffee and whatever air freshener Jenny had bought me last Christmas. Pine forest or mountain breeze or some nonsense. Home. I dropped my hospital bag by the door. The discharge papers, the medications, all that could wait. There was something more important to do first. Despite the screaming in my knee, I headed straight for the garage. Had to say hello to my old lady. Had to tell her about the kids, about how they'd come through, about how we were finally going to finish what we started. My hand found the garage door button by muscle memory. 20 years of hitting that same spot. The motor kicked in with its familiar whine, and the door started its slow climb. The afternoon sun cut across the empty concrete like an accusation. I stood there, blinking, my brain doing that thing where it keeps trying to refresh the image. Like maybe if I closed my eyes and opened them again, the car would be there. But no, just that oil stain, darker than I remembered, shaped like something that had bled out and died. My first thought wasn't betrayal. That's the thing about trust. It's the last thing to break. My first thought was theft. Some lowlife had broken in while I was in the hospital. Probably saw the ambulance take me away. Knew the house would be empty. I was already reaching for my phone, already planning what I'd tell the cops, already thinking about insurance claims and recovery odds. Mark answered on the second ring. Before he could even say hello, I was yelling about the Shelby being stolen, about calling police, about checking if the neighbors had security cameras. There was this pause. Not a shocked pause. Not a confused pause. The kind of pause you take when you're preparing to explain something to a child who doesn't understand how the world really works. Then Mark spoke, and his voice had that controlled patience that made me want to reach through the phone. He told me to calm down. Said nobody stole anything. Said he'd told me they'd handled everything, remember? The hospital bill? The $1,500? I was still standing in that empty garage, still staring at that oil stain, when he said it. They'd sold the car. My car. Maria's car. Our car. Sold it like it was an old refrigerator or a broken lawnmower. The words came out of his mouth so easily. He said they got $1,000 for it. And the way he said it, you'd think he performed a miracle. Actually used the word generous to describe the offer. Said the buyer was doing us a favor, taking that rust bucket off our hands. Rust bucket. That's what my son called 40 years of marriage, 20 years of grief therapy, and the last promise I'd made to his mother. I must have gone quiet because Mark started talking faster, filling the silence with justifications. He said I'd always complained about the car anyway. Said it had been sitting there for years without running. Said the money went to good use. That my health was more important than some old car. Some old car. I hung up on him. First time in his entire life I'd ever done that. Then I sat down right there on the garage floor, bad knee and all, and tried to understand how I'd raised a son who could do this. The thing about betrayal is that it rewrites history. Every memory gets re-examined. Every I love you, Dad becomes suspect. Every Father's Day card feels like a performance. You start wondering if you ever really knew them at all, or if you just knew the version of them they wanted you to see. For a week, I lived in this new reality. I ate my meals, took my pills, did my physical therapy exercises, but it was all automatic, like I was operating my body by remote control while my actual self was somewhere else, trying to process what had happened. Jenny called a few times. Bright, cheerful conversations about nothing. Asked about my knee, told me about her students, never once mentioned the car. It was like we were all playing this game where we pretended a piece of my soul hadn't been ripped out and sold for scrap. Then the mail came. It was a standard envelope from Aetna, my Medicare supplemental insurance. I almost threw it away unopened. Just another explanation of benefits, another piece of medical bureaucracy. But habits die hard, and 30 years in insurance had taught me to read everything. I unfolded the paper, found a section for my recent surgery and therapy, and there it was in bland corporate font. Knee physiotherapy, experimental protocol. Total cost, $4,847. Insurance payment, $4,847. Your responsibility, $0. $0. 0 cents. Everything covered. The paper slipped from my hands, floated to the kitchen table like a feather made of lead. The entire story about needing $1,500 had been a lie. Not a misunderstanding. Not a mix-up. A lie. Designed specifically to steal from me while making me feel grateful for it. I sat in my kitchen for hours, staring at that piece of paper. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. Normal sounds of a normal world. While inside my house, nothing would ever be normal again. You want to know what the worst part was? It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the car. Not really. It was the gratitude. They'd made me feel grateful for being robbed. Made me lie in that hospital bed, bragging to nurses about my wonderful children, while they were literally selling my dreams for pocket change. That's when I started making calls. Every junkyard in a 50-mile radius. Every salvage lot. Every scrap dealer. I described the car over and over until the words became meaningless. 1967 Shelby GT500, blue with white stripes. Rough condition but complete. Finally, on call number 17, I got a hit. Eddie's Auto Salvage, out on 8 Mile. Yeah, he had it. Came in about 10 days ago. Some young guy, clean cut, said it was his dad's, but Dad was moving to Florida, downsizing. I drove out there that afternoon. My knee screamed the entire drive, but I pushed through it. Had to see for myself. Had to know it was real. Eddie's was exactly what you'd expect. Mountains of dead cars stacked like graveyards. The office was a trailer that had seen better decades, and Eddie himself looked like he'd been carved from beef jerky and cigarette smoke. He led me through the maze of metal corpses, past forgotten dreams and abandoned projects. And there she was, shoved between a retired school bus and a pyramid of washing machines. They'd left the driver's door open, and someone had hung a grimy jumpsuit from it, like she was nothing but a closet now. Seeing her like that was worse than seeing the empty garage. At least an empty space has dignity. This was degradation. Eddie leaned against the school bus, picking his teeth with a business card. Said he'd paid $1,000 for it, like Mark had said. But for me, special price. $2,000, cash only. Today only. Take it or leave it, because tomorrow it goes to the crusher. The crusher, like she was garbage. I didn't have $2,000. Didn't have anything close to that. But Tom Morrison still owed me from when I'd helped him with his insurance claim after his house fire. Not money, just a favor he'd insisted he'd repay someday. That day had come. Tom didn't ask questions. Just showed up at Eddie's with an envelope of cash and helped me arrange for a tow truck. We got her home that evening, and Tom helped me push her back into the garage. He looked at me, looked at the car, looked at the oil stain on the floor that lined up perfectly with where she'd been bleeding out. He knew something was wrong, knew this wasn't normal. But Tom was old school. You didn't pry into another man's business. He just clapped me on the shoulder, told me to call if I needed anything, and left. I stood in that garage until well past midnight, just looking at her, trying to reconcile the machine in front of me with everything she'd meant, everything she still meant. The next morning, my phone rang. Jenny. Her voice dripped with fake concern, like syrup over broken glass. She'd heard I'd bought the car back. Heard? From who? I hadn't told anyone except Tom. But somehow she knew. Mark knew. They were talking about me, comparing notes, strategizing. She started in with this rehearsed speech about being worried, about my judgment, about whether the surgery had affected my mental state. She actually used the word obsession, said it wasn't healthy to spend my last savings on a car that hadn't run in years. Said maybe I should talk to someone, a professional. The gaslighting was so perfect, so complete, that for a second I almost believed her. Almost thought maybe I was the crazy one. Maybe spending $2,000 I didn't have on a broken car was insane. Maybe they were right to be concerned. But then she said something that snapped everything into focus. She said they'd done it for my own good. That phrase, for your own good, like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with scissors. I told her I'd found the insurance statement. Told her I knew the $1,500 was a lie. There was silence on the other end. Not guilty silence. Calculating silence. She was thinking, figuring out the next move, the next lie. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Harder, colder. She said the money wasn't the point. Said they were trying to help me move on. Said Mom would want me to live in the present, not the past. Said Mom would be disappointed to see me like this, using Maria against me, using her memory as a weapon. That's when I knew my children weren't just selfish. They were cruel. I hung up on her and turned off my phone. Let them whisper about Dad's mental state. I had work to do. I stood there in the garage, looking at my vandalized dream. They'd made me beg to buy back my own past, made me grateful for my own betrayal. They thought they were the heroes, saving their senile father from himself. The oil stain on the floor had dried to the color of old blood. I stood on it and felt something inside me break. Not like glass shattering, like a bone that has to be reset. Painful, necessary. My children were gone. In their place were two strangers who had used my trust as a weapon and my love as a tool. I looked at the Shelby, wounded and abandoned, treated like trash by the people who should have cherished her. She was the only honest thing left in my life, and I was going to save her. She was the only honest thing left in my life, and I was going to save her. That became my mantra. Every morning when my niece screamed at me to stay in bed. Every night when my hands cramped from holding tools. All day. Save her. Fix her. Make her whole again. The garage became my church, and restoration became my religion. 5 in the morning, I'd be out there with coffee that could strip paint, studying every dent, every rust spot, every broken dream that needed fixing. The work wasn't just mechanical. It was medicinal. See, when you're sanding rust off a quarter panel, you can't think about your son calling your life's work a rust bucket. The sandpaper doesn't care about betrayal. It just wants smooth metal. When you're rebuilding a carburetor, each tiny spring and valve demands complete attention. No room for wondering how you raise kids who could look you in the eye while robbing you blind. Physical pain became my friend. The ache in my back from leaning over the engine bay meant I was making progress. The cuts on my knuckles from slipped wrenches were proof I was still fighting. Every drop of blood I left on that car was a promise that I wouldn't give up on her like everyone else had. 3 weeks in, I hit a wall, literally and figuratively. The engine block had damage I hadn't seen before. Some kind of hairline crack that would mean a complete rebuild, maybe even a replacement. The kind of repair that would cost more than I'd ever have. I stood there, 3 in the morning, covered in grease and failure, and something in me just snapped. I threw my wrench at the garage wall. It left a dent in the drywall that's still there today. Then I started yelling at the car, at myself, at the universe. Told that Shelby she was just junk after all. Told her my kids were right. Told her maybe everyone was right, and I was just a senile old fool playing with toys. Couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying every condescending word, every pitying look, every suggestion that maybe I needed professional help. Maybe they were right. Maybe spending money I didn't have on a car that might never run again was textbook insanity. Around 4 in the morning, I found myself in the basement, going through Dad's old stuff, not looking for anything specific, just needing to be near something that remembered when I wasn't crazy, when I was just a kid who loved cars and had a father who understood. His toolbox was there, still organized the way he'd left it. Under the socket sets, I found his old notebook. The leather cover had mostly rotted away, but the pages inside were still readable. Dad's handwriting, careful and precise, documenting every interesting car he'd worked on. I sat on the basement floor, reading by the light of a single bulb, traveling back through time with every page. Then I found it, June 15th, 1968. Saw something interesting at the Woodward Dream Cruise today. Carroll Shelby himself was there, with 3 GT500S, but one was different. Had the 427 side oiler from the GT40 race cars instead of the standard 428. Guy from Ford whispered it was an experiment. Super Snake, they called it, only making 3. Serial numbers would be different from standard production. Something special in the chassis code. My hands started shaking. I read it again. Then again. I practically ran to the garage. Bad knee be damned. Got under the car with a flashlight and a wire brush, scraping decades of dirt and oil off the chassis. There was, stamped into the metal like a birth certificate, the numbers Dad had mentioned, the special code. I sat under that car for an hour, flashlight beam dancing off metal, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just a Shelby. This was history. This was legend. This was impossible. The next morning, I got on a computer and found the Shelby American Automobile Club forum. Posted pictures of the serial number, the engine bay, every identifying mark I could find. Used my real name, George Franklin, because at my age, what's the point of internet aliases? The response was immediate and skeptical. People said it had to be fake. Said the Super Snakes were all accounted for. Said I was either mistaken or trying to pull some kind of scam. But one user, handle was Cobra Keeper 427, asked for more pictures, specific angles, close-ups of certain welds. Turned out Cobra Keeper 427 was actually Dr. Richard Patterson, former Ford engineer, current SAC historian, and probably the world's leading expert on Shelby Super Snakes. We exchanged emails for 3 weeks. He'd ask for a photo of some obscure bracket. I'd send it. He'd go silent for days, then come back with 20 more questions. Finally, he called me. Real phone call, not email. His voice was shaking like he'd found the Holy Grail in his breakfast cereal. He told me to sit down. told me what I had wasn't just rare, it was impossible. Of the 3 Super Snakes built, 2 had been destroyed in testing. The third was supposedly in a private collection, but he'd been trying to verify its existence for 20 years without success. Because the real third car, the one I had sitting in my garage, had been sold privately before records were kept properly. It had disappeared into history. Until now, he kept talking about auction values, about museum interest, about historical significance. $1 million car, he said. Maybe more, maybe much more. The only surviving Super Snake prototype. The missing link in Shelby history. I was still processing when he said something that stopped me cold. He said my kids were idiots. His exact words. Said anyone who'd sell this car for $1,000 shouldn't be allowed near anything with wheels. Then he asked if I wanted to make them regret it for the rest of their lives. That's when he mentioned Barrett-Jackson, the Scottsdale auction, the Super Bowl of classic car sales. He said he could authenticate the car, document everything, create what he called a provenance package. Said the auction would be in 3 months, just enough time to get the paperwork perfect even if the car wasn't. He said something else too. Said the story would be worth as much as the car. Local man discovers priceless prototype that his own children threw away. Media would eat it up. Every car guy in America would be rooting for me. We agreed to keep it quiet until the auction. No social media, no bragging, no hints to anyone. Let the reveal happen on the biggest stage possible. Maximum impact, he called it. I called it perfect. But the best part was what happened next. Dr. Patterson said he was flying out to see the car in person. Said he'd help with the restoration. Make sure everything was documented correctly. Said he'd been waiting his whole career to find this car, and he'd be damned if he'd let it go to auction looking anything less than perfect. 3 days later, the 70-year-old professor shows up at my door with 2 suitcases and a box of original Ford documentation. We spent the next 2 months in that garage, not just restoring the car, but uncovering its story. Every part we removed revealed something new. Racing modifications that were never supposed to exist. Engineering signatures hidden in the metalwork. History written in steel and aluminum. The crack in the engine block. Turned out it was supposed to be there. A deliberate stress relief cut that Ford had experimented with for high-performance applications. What I thought was damage was actually innovation. We worked 18-hour days. Dr. Patterson had connections everywhere. Parts that couldn't be bought were donated by collectors who wanted to be part of the story. Machine shops did work for free, just to say they'd touched the legendary Super Snake. The car community rallied around us like we were building a monument, which I guess we were. Meanwhile, my phone stayed quiet. Mark and Jenny had apparently decided I needed space to work through my mental health crisis. They were probably planning an intervention, complete with therapists and treatment centers. Let them plan. The day we finished the restoration, Dr. Patterson opened a bottle of champagne he'd bought in 1968, same year as the car. We sat in the garage, 2 old men with busted knuckles and tired backs, looking at something impossible we'd made possible. She was perfect. Not showroom perfect, but perfect. Every scratch had been earned. Every repair had been done right. She looked exactly like what she was, a survivor that had been through hell and come out stronger. The Barrett-Jackson people sent a transport truck. Enclosed trailer, climate-controlled, GPS-tracked, insured for $2 million. The driver took photos of every angle before loading, treated her like she was made of spun glass and dreams. Watching her roll into that trailer, I felt like a parent sending their kid off to college. Dr. Patterson flew with me to Scottsdale. First-class tickets, paid for by a documentary crew that wanted to film the whole thing. The auction was scheduled for Saturday, prime time, live on television. The catalog listing was simple. 1967 Shelby GT500 Super Snake prototype. The Lost Snake returns. By Friday, the story had exploded. Every automotive journalist in the country wanted an interview. Jay Leno called personally. But the best part was Saturday morning when I was having breakfast at the hotel. The TV in the corner was showing a morning news program, and they were discussing the auction. The host mentioned that the car had been discovered after being sold for scrap by the owner's children. The other host actually gasped, said she couldn't imagine how those kids must feel. The first host laughed and said they'd probably learned the most expensive lesson of their lives. Then they moved on to weather, but I sat there staring at my eggs, thinking about Mark and Jenny watching that same program. The auction was scheduled for 8 p.m. Prime time. I stood backstage, wearing the only suit I owned, watching the crowd through a gap in the curtains. Thousands of people, millions more watching on TV and online. Dr. Patterson stood next to me, grinning like a kid on Christmas. Then I saw them, Mark and Jenny, sitting in the back row of the auction hall. They must have flown in that morning. They looked pale, scared, like they'd seen a ghost, which I guess they had. The ghost of their inheritance, about to be sold to the highest bidder. The auctioneer started the story, talked about Carroll Shelby's vision, about Ford's racing program, about the 3 prototypes and how 2 were destroyed, about how this one disappeared for 50 years, about a son who sold it for scrap while his father was in the hospital, about a father who bought it back and discovered what he really had. The crowd was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping. Standing ovation before the bidding even started. I could see Mark and Jenny sinking lower in their seats. Bidding opened at $500,000. Jumped to $1 million in 30 seconds. The auctioneer was a master, working the room, telling the story between bids, building the drama. $1.5 million, $2 million, $2.25. At $2.5 million, it slowed down. 2 bidders left, going back and forth in 25,000 increments. The whole room held its breath. $2,650, $2,675, $2,700. The hammer came down at $2,750,000. Plus buyer's premium, the total was over $3 million. After auction fees, I'd clear about $2.75 million. The auctioneer announced that it was a new record for a Shelby prototype. The crowd erupted. People were hugging strangers. Car guys were crying actual tears. I stood there on that stage, looking out the chaos, and found Mark and Jenny's faces in the crowd. They weren't sinking anymore. They were frozen, staring at the sale board showing the final price. Jenny's mouth was open. Mark looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. That night, back at the hotel, my phone rang for the first time in 3 months. Mark first, then Jenny, then both on a conference call. Crying, apologizing, begging for forgiveness, saying they'd been wrong, so wrong, saying they'd do anything to make it right. I let them talk, let them pour out their guilt and regret and sudden understanding of what family meant. When they finally ran out of words, there was just silence on the line. I took a deep breath. My father, I said slowly, my father taught me about engine blocks. I told them how any part can be fixed if the foundation is solid, but if there's a crack in the block itself, the structural integrity is gone, can't be welded, can't be patched, has to be replaced entirely. Our family had a crack in the block. They'd put it there when they looked at my life's work and saw scrap metal, when they lied to me in my moment of weakness, when they tried to gaslight me into believing I was crazy for wanting to keep my promise to their mother. I told them I loved them, would always love them, but I couldn't trust them. And without trust, what was left? I wished them well, told them to be better for their own children. Then I hung up and blocked their numbers. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. 6 months later, I stood in a different garage. Bigger, brighter. A sign out front read, Franklin and Franklin Memorial Automotive Academy, named for Maria and my father. Free training for kids who couldn't afford technical school. Real skills for real jobs. We'd bought 3 buildings on the old Packard plant site, fixed them up with the auction money, hired certified instructors, got accreditation from the state. The documentary about the Super Snake had brought in donations from car lovers worldwide. We had a waiting list of kids wanting to learn. I was teaching a carburetor class when I noticed one student, a girl named Sarah, 17 years old, foster kid from the West Side. She had that look, the same one I'd had at her age, the same one my father had recognized in me. Hands that knew what to do before her brain did. Eyes that saw the solution, while others saw the problem. She stayed after class, helped me clean up, asked about the photo on the wall, the Super Snake at auction. I told her the story. All of it. She listened without interrupting, then said something that stopped me cold. She said family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who sees your value when the world calls you worthless. She said, I hadn't lost my children. I discovered they were never really mine to begin with. But this place, these kids, this knowledge I was passing on, that was real family. Smart kid. Reminded me of someone I used to know. Someone who'd chosen insurance over iron, safety over dreams. Someone who'd forgotten that the best inheritance isn't money. It's purpose. Now I watch Sarah work, watch her teach newer students what I've taught her, watch the cycle continue. My knee still hurts. My hands are still scarred. But every morning, I open those academy doors knowing that my father's dream didn't die. It just took a detour. Mark and Jenny send Christmas cards. I don't open them. Some cracks can't be fixed, but new foundations can be built. And sometimes, just sometimes, the family you choose is worth more than the family you're born with. The Shelby Super Snake is in a museum now. The owner loans it back once a year for our academy fundraiser. We raise enough to fund 50 kids' education. They all know the story. They all know what it means to take something broken and make it priceless. That's the real restoration, not the car. Me, broken down, betrayed, rebuilt, stronger at the broken places, worth more after the damage than before. My father was right. Good iron never lets you down. Neither does good work. Neither does earned trust. Neither does chosen family. The academy runs 2 shifts now, morning and evening. 300 kids a year learning that their hands have value, their skills matter, their dreams are worth fighting for. Sarah's heading to Michigan State next year. Full scholarship, engineering program. She'll be back, though. She promised. And her promises, unlike some, are worth believing. This is where the story ends, but not where life ends. Every morning, I unlock the academy, turn on the lights, and wait for the kids to show up. They always do. Eager. Ready? Trustworthy. We're building more than engines here. We're building futures. We're building trust. We're building the family that should have been. And somewhere my father is smiling. Somewhere Maria is proud. And somewhere Mark and Jenny are learning that some mistakes cost more than money. They cost everything. The morning shift is arriving. I see Sarah at the door, holding it open for the younger kids, showing them where to sign in. She catches my eye and smiles. A real smile. The kind you can build a future on. My father would have liked her. Hell, he would have loved her.